Hello and welcome to today's video. We will be discussing an important conservation area in Arkansas known as Holla National Wildlife Refuge. We will begin with a brief overview of the location of the wildlife refuge. Next, we will discuss the history of the refuge as well as some concurrent events in Arkansas. Next, we will look at the wildlife refuge as it is today with the wildlife and plants that can be found there. Finally, we will end our discussion with why Holla Bend is important to modern conservation efforts. Holla Bend is located 6 miles south of Dardanelle, a town in northeastern Yell County. The wildlife refuge stretches across 7,057 acres through Yell and Pope counties. Holla Bend is not the only natural wonder near Dardanelle, as Petit Jean State Park, Mount Magazine State Park, Dardanelle Rock, and Mount Nebo are all situated within the town's immediate vicinity. Holla Bend is located within a man-made meander in the Arkansas River. The alteration of this portion of the river played a key role in the creation of the wildlife refuge. Before fully diving into the creation of Holla Bend, we will look at the events preceding its designation as a wildlife refuge. Arkansas experienced a series of devastating floods in 1927 and 1937. The Great Flood of 1927 was the most destructive and cost-intensive flood the state had seen at that time, with the 1937 flood again inundating the state only a decade later. These two floods submerged much of Arkansas and effectively destroyed years of agricultural advancement between them. The area that would become Holla Bend National Wildlife Refuge was one such area inundated by these floods. The area was populated by more than 65 families in the early 1900s. These families made their living by farming the rich soil in the Holla Bend bottoms. Aside from the obvious destruction caused by flood conditions, these farmers were also forced to relocate due to large amounts of sand, up to 4 feet in some places, that had been deposited by the flooding events. This sand effectively rendered the soils in the area as useless for agriculture. The effects of these floods can still be observed in modern soils in the area as they are sandy and prone to drought. In 1954, almost 2 decades after the flood of 1937, and years after Holla Bend's families were forced from their homes, the United States Army Corps of Engineers began to straighten a section of the Arkansas River. They did so by cutting a channel through the Holla Bend bottoms to assist in flood control. An island situated directly between the new and old channels resulted from this project. The resulting island would eventually become the Holla Bend National Wildlife Refuge. The refuge did not always encompass the 7,056 acres under management today. In fact, in 1957, 4 years after the initial flood control project, the National Fish and Wildlife Service gained control over 4,068 acres of land. Nearly 30 years later, in 1985, litigation brought over 1,500 new acres to the refuge. Other lands acquired totaled 589 acres, with 441 of those being a migratory bird closure area. Although Holla Bend was an unintended consequence of the federal government's efforts to curb flooding in Arkansas, the wildlife refuge is an important modern conservation resource. Many types of birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles call this area their home. Furthermore, soil management regimes have allowed native plants to thrive in flood-damaged soils. Before we discuss any cuddly critters, we should take a peek at their habitats. Holla Bend National Wildlife Refuge manages 2,700 acres of bottomland forest, about half the area of JFK Airport, and 1,620 acres, which is about twice the area of Central Park in New York City, of reforested bottomland hardwoods. The bottomland forest predates the creation of the refuge, with old-growth trees such as Osage orange, red cedar, box elder, and other native trees surrounded by Chickasaw plum thickets. Areas that are more inundated with water are home to willow trees as well. New growth areas have been managed since 1995 when agricultural and fallow fields were initially planted with hardwood seedlings. Nut-all oak, swamp chestnut oak, native sweet pecan, and flowering dogwood are all examples of species planted in the initial reforestation effort. Unfortunately, not all seedlings were able to prosper because of the previously mentioned sandy and drought-prone soil. Areas with less success were allowed to reseed naturally, with cottonwood, sycamore, box elder, and wild plums becoming prevalent. Birds are the most plentiful type of wildlife in Holla Bend National Wildlife Refuge, with over 200 species of birds occupying the refuge during the year. This is partially because of its location along the Mississippi Flyway, a migration route that follows the Mississippi, Missouri, and Ohio rivers. Raptors such as bald eagles, Cooper's hawks, and northern harriers all use the refuge for wintering habitat, while ospreys and Mississippi kites pass through during migration season. 6 species of owls make their home in the refuge year-round as well. According to the National Audubon Society, 3,000 or more raptors and owls pass through the refuge during seasonal migrations, which works out to roughly 3 raptors per square mile of territory. Holla Bend also provides temporary habitat for migrating neotropical songbirds. These birds originate in Central and South America and use the refuge as a rest stop during their journeys to and from their homes. Other birds that migrate during the spring and summer seasons use the refuge for nesting and breeding. Some examples of songbirds found in Holla Bend are painted buntings, Kentucky warblers, bobolinks, and scissor-tailed flycatchers. Waterfowl constitute a major percentage of the bird population within Holla Bend. More than 10,000 waterfowl can be found in the refuge year-round, with that number shooting up to 100,000 during migratory seasons. 14 species of ducks and 4 species of geese visit the refuge during the year, but mallards are the most common. Mallards are so plentiful that the 2000 National Audubon Society Christmas bird count listed nearly 20,000 of that species alone. Feathered friends are not the only critters to be found on the refuge. Holla Bend is a known habitat for many mammals as well. For example, white-tailed deer, bobcats, and rabbits can be seen throughout the year. During the winter months, beaver and river otter can be seen as well. Occasionally, a lucky visitor may be able to spot a black bear. Reptiles and amphibians can also be found in Holla Bend. Common species include cottonmouth snakes, green tree frogs, broadhead skinks, and common snapping turtles. Holla Bend is also home to a modest population of American alligators, a species of reptile that can reach over 12 feet and weigh as much as 1,000 pounds. Holla Bend is home to many species, both animal and plant, that are in desperate need of protection and conservation. Bottomland and bottomland hardwood forests are extremely important to modern conservation, as these forests reduce the risk and severity of flooding in downstream communities by their ability to store water in flood-prone areas such as the Holla Bend bottoms. Furthermore, only 40% of the initial 30 million acres of bottomland forest in the United States exist today. Thus, the management and protection of these forests is vital. Breeding, migration, or wintering seasons. Holla Bend is especially important due to its location along the Mississippi Flyway, meaning that the nature reserve is in a path with great foot, or wing, traffic. Animals such as the black bear can also find refuge in Holla Bend. While black bear populations thrive in Arkansas today, that was not always the case. Black bears were hunted nearly to extinction during Arkansas's early days, with the population dwindling to only 30 individual bears at one point in time. It was not until 1958 that bears from other parts of North America, such as Minnesota and Canada, were introduced to revitalize native populations. This precedent is why wildlife refuge areas such as Holla Bend are so important for animal conservationists. Another example of this would be the American alligator. American alligators are classified as a threatened species in Arkansas and can also be found in Holla Bend. The wildlife refuge is situated at the northern edge of the reptile's territory. Even though they do not exist in large numbers in Holla Bend, the habitat the wildlife refuge creates is very important to conservation efforts as it offers desperately needed nesting territory. Furthermore, areas such as Holla Bend make population rehabilitation possible. Dedicated conservation areas give refuge to flora and fauna that experience displacement from factors such as deforestation and development. In all, Holla Bend has a rich and storied history that symbolizes Arkansas's triumph over tragedy. Arkansas was able to use the land that was once devastated by floods to create a haven for all life, including those with nowhere else to go. I hope that this short video taught you a little bit about one of Arkansas's most treasured sites. Thank you.